So I'm sorry to say it, guys, but I have it on the very good authority of random comments on the internet that apparently I'm a grifter. I shared my incredibly negative opinion of Ironheart, and I've made a couple of videos laying out some of my biggest worries about both Superman and the new DCU we're getting under James Gunn. And I did not know this, but according to internet law, if you raise concerns about how the comics and characters you passionately love are in danger of being bastardized into something so unrecognizable that they are no longer the comics and characters you passionately loved, apparently that means you actually didn't passionately love those comics and characters. You're just a grifter manipulating a bunch of brain-dead chuds, in this case you, into some kind of fill-in-the-blank cultural war frenzy that apparently you are stupid enough to have been hypnotized into. And that's a real shame, because I really did think I loved this stuff. But I did not love Ironheart. So I guess I better go burn all my comics and toss my figures into the garbage. But you know what? Wait a minute. Actually, there may still be hope. Because as far as Superman and Gunn's DCU goes, I actually do have hope it'll be good. There are actually a lot of reasons to feel tentatively optimistic and even a bit excited for what we're going to be getting out of this movie and hopefully from more DC movies beyond it if it does well. As I've said before, I have reservations too. Quite a lot of them, in fact. And I do mean a lot. I'm a big, and I mean big DC fan. And as I've said in previous videos, James Gunn is not always the best at adapting these characters correctly. But this video ain't for that. Let's counter those red flags I've been talking about by taking a look at some of the biggest green flags that Superman will be good. And hopefully, maybe even awesome. Starting with the first and most obvious green flag that the movie will be good, or at least make money. James Gunn's track record. So, love the guy or hate him, James Gunn ain't in charge of this thing for no reason. He took Guardians of the Galaxy, a franchise no one outside of comics had ever heard of, and made Rocket Raccoon Groot and frickin' Drax the Destroyer household names. He took Peacemaker, who at the time comic writers had been wasting for years, and turned him into an actually fairly well-known and popular character, soon getting a second season of his show. He drastically changes a lot of the characters he works on, which can drive a purist like me absolutely nuts. But crazily, even I usually quite like the characters we get out of them, because they're still good characters. Unlike a lot of modern Hollywood, Gunn is actually a writer who gives a shit about what he's writing about. I believe he loves the characters he's writing. I believe he cares about their arcs and stories. And whether I personally approve of the changes he makes to the source material, the majority of people really don't care about that, and seem to actually really like his characters as well. Say what you want about him, but the guy is a writer, not just some soulless bureaucrat cynically trying to market a corporate trademark. We know from interviews he demands a finished script before filming. While he's been very critical of Marvel and other Hollywood projects for just, winging the script while filming the movie as if they'll be able to come up with something good at the end, which is incredibly rare outside of something like Die Hard. For that alone, thank frickin' God. I have no idea when finishing your homework the morning it's due became standard practice for Hollywood's $100 million movie investments, but just knowing a guy who finishes the damn script before filming is doing Superman makes me breathe a sigh of relief. More than anything, people are sick and tired of low-effort content churned out by mindless amateurs. And though he's stereotyped for the unique sense of humor he has in his projects, that ain't all he is. He juggles humor and serious emotional moments actually quite well, in a going from hot to cold way I'm not used to seeing outside of anime. The jokes he writes in are his genuine sense of humor. Any subversion or irony are his genuine ideas. It isn't that corporate-mandated 3 jokes per scene and ironic subversion to appeal to youth demographic bullcrap that we've been getting for years now. That annoying and boring modern Marvel style originated from how insanely popular the Whedon and Gunn style of Marvel movies were, with less talented hacks trying to emulate it like a bunch of brain-dead lemmings who have no idea what a joke is or what a serious moment is. And as far as Superman goes, honestly, I think the franchise could use some humor. Superman has been portrayed so self-serious in the last couple movie iterations, but Superman is an incredibly fun and playful character. And I think if it's not too overboard and doesn't interrupt the plot, a bit of Gunn's style could help unlock that for general audiences. And though the Guardians are a bunch of criminals, they ain't nihilistic villains. Each movie ends with the team sacrificing themselves to save others, with Rocket even sparing High Evolutionary at the end of Guardians 3 because it's the heroic thing to do. So though superficially you wouldn't think that you could trust this guy to do an, good old-fashioned hero, I really think there's enough evidence within his previous projects to show that he probably can. Gunn's past work gives me hope that Superman will have humor, heart, and heroism in a way that can appeal to both mass audiences and superhero fans. Not because the characters are going to be one-to-one accurate, because they ain't, but because the guy does seem to understand superhero universes, and usually, at least superficially, things are pretty correct, leading into my next green flag. A movie where superheroes dress like friggin' superheroes. One thing that's been clear from the trailers is that the world we're getting in this new Superman movie ain't just going to be our world. It's not going to be another boring version of what if superheroes existed in the real world. Wow! That was cool in Iron Man 1, and even partially in moments of Man of Steel. But it's something people have clearly gotten bored of. And judging by how he just ignored the tone of the MCU when he did Guardians of the Galaxy, something Gunn was clearly never interested in. So instead of what if it's our world with a superhero in it, it's going to instead be the world is just a full-on superhero world. Superhero worlds in comics have their own internal logic that makes sense within the world, but the second you start questioning it, the whole thing starts to fall apart. With one of the main questions always being, why do the heroes and villains wear those bizarre, colorful costumes? In the rules of our world, you gotta bend over backwards to come up with all these deep psychological issues and yada 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 to justify it. But in a superhero world, they just wear costumes because it makes perfect sense to do that in a superhero world. Are you fighting or committing crime? In a superhero world, you'd look absolutely asinine doing so in your street clothes, outside of a very small group of characters who can pull it off. So in Superman, why do Superman and Mr. Terrific dress like that? In the greater DCU, why are Peacemaker and Polka Dot Man dressed like that? The better question is, why wouldn't they be dressed like that? That's the kind of world this is, man. You're the weird one for thinking it's weird. The entire basis of superhero universes is people dressing up in colorful costumes and fighting crime. That's what it's been since the beginning. There's no point questioning it, because then you're questioning the very concept that you're making a story about. Because over in the MCU, we don't actually have a superhero universe. Who actually wears a costume for just no reason? Not something to aid them in their power like Ant-Man, not a uniform like Black Panther or Carol Danvers. Just a completely superficial, no reason whatsoever to be wearing it superhero costume. Spider-Man? Cap? Kinda? Sometimes. And with the villains? Yeah, no. Usually they're in even less colorful outfits and often just wearing street clothes or some weird metal crap. And this is why Sam Wilson looks so goddamn stupid when he first put on his Captain America costume. If this were a costumed hero universe, he'd just look normal and fine. But it ain't. And he comes waltzing out wearing one of the most over-the-top outfits of the modern comic era. They quickly realized the error they'd made and tossed something a lot more universe accurate onto him in his own movie. And the DCEU wasn't that much better. At first, Flash's outfit is just made out of stolen NASA shielding to protect him from the friction of moving so fast. Wonder Woman is only wearing an ancient ceremonial armor that just happens to be the colors of the United States. Superman is just wearing a quickly painted Kryptonian uniform his dad gave him that everyone wore back on Krypton. And though Deadshot did have his mask, he barely bothers to wear it, with the rest of Task Force X pretty much just wearing regular clothes. But when Gunn came in, that changed. Suddenly we had a group of villains who wear full costumes for virtually no reason, making up Task Force X. And in Peacemaker, we get Vigilante and White Dragon both fully dressed up alongside him in totally mundane settings. They followed this up with the Justice Society and Black Adam being in full costume, as well as the Flash suddenly just wearing one, but this also felt a bit jarring since that was not the logic of this universe. But with Superman, we've got a mostly clean slate, where we can just establish from the outset, superheroes frickin' wear costumes. They just do. If you ain't into that, maybe you ain't a superhero fan after all. Maybe you're just a fan of action movies. The sky is now the limit on what characters they can toss in going forwards. They don't have to sit there and think about how do we make fill-in-the-blank character work in this universe. Especially with the villains, who look so boring over in the MCU. This is why the Flash fought some stupid dark version of himself instead of Reverse Flash or the Rogues. It's just how Hollywood people think. They think superheroes are stupid. Gunn may or may not think they're stupid, I couldn't tell you, but he does present them as what they are, even if it's in a somewhat self-aware and ironic way. So embracing the colorful silliness of costumes opens us up to an entirely different, uniquely superhero style of stories that we can tell, leading me to my next green flag. Superman lore. not just some guy with Superman powers and costumes lore. The classic Richard Donner Superman films adapted a lot of Superman's lore. We got Krypton, Kryptonite, the Fortress of Solitude, Lois Lane, the Daily Planet, Lex Luthor, General Zod, and the Phantom Zone. And since then, following Superman films have adapted nothing else. Superman 3 and 4 just started making its own stupid crap up. Superman Returns was just some weird remix of all those classic movie elements with a weird illegitimate son plotline added in. Man of Steel was a redo of Zod and the Kryptonians from 2, down to the black suits they iconically wore. And though we've had 2 Supergirls, they never actually appeared on screen with Superman except in a crappy CGI AI cameo in the flesh. The only real new element we've gotten was Doomsday, and that version of him was so different, he might as well have just been Nuclear Man. For some reason, when people go in to adapt Superman, they think that they're just adapting those original movies, when Superman has starred in literally thousands of comic books, with over 80 years of continuity to draw from. And they seem to think Superman only has like 10 things to work with because those original movies did such an iconic job at them. TV shows seem to understand this. Superman the Animated Series, Smallville, Superman and Lois, all of them adapted much more than we've ever seen out of the movies. But movies are what most people watch, not shows. And so the majority of the public seems to have this asinine idea that Superman, the greatest hero of all time, one of the greatest characters who's ever existed, is boring. He just flies in and Lex throws some kryptonite at him, and maybe he fights Zod. That's about all they know there is to this guy. But with this movie, right out of the gate, they're adding a lot of the Silver Age elements Superman is well known for in comics that people outside of comics have never seen associated with him. Krypto, a version of Superman robots, a much more fleshed out Daily Planet with Jimmy Olsen, Cat Grant, and Steve Lombard being more than just glorified background characters. Superman protecting Metropolis from giant monsters, a Metropolis that looks like Metropolis, not just New York City. Countless other superheroes and villains for Superman to interact with, and a world with an entire history of all kinds of crazy things like the comics, instead of just a world with a couple superheroes and barely any villains. And that's only some of the stuff we know. If they've already given all that away, who knows what other elements of Superman and DC lore we're going to be getting moving forwards? The Legion of Superheroes? Beppo the Super Monkey? Finally get a goddamn Bizarro or Brainiac in a movie? Because they're already embracing more elements of Superman's lore than we've been seeing for decades, the sky is really the limit. Choosing Superman as their first movie is a good sign, because out of the DC universe, it's the only real choice. DC begins with Superman. I mean, not technically, but you know what I mean. Every hero and villain is going to be measured by how Superman's portrayed. A more gritty, realistic Superman leads to a more gritty, realistic universe. A more bright, playful Superman will lead to a more bright and playful universe. Starting with Superman and centering the universe around him may seem completely obvious, but it clearly wasn't to the previous morons in charge, since they'd been basically running the universe without him for like 5 years after Justice League bombed. As if the DC universe could be held up by frickin' Aquaman and Harley Quinn alone. And we already know that we're getting Supergirl immediately after in her own movie, and it being very likely that we'll finally get to see the two on screen together in either that movie or something coming right after it. Look how damn popular Batman's gotten. And a lot of that is because the movies people have seen of him have actually embraced and explored a lot of his lore. If you actually bother exploring some of Superman's lore, I think he could return to being as popular as he was back in the day with the general public. There's a real love and desire for the character in pop culture. That's why all these non-Superman XP characters like Homelander, Omni-Man, Sentry, and even All Might have been getting so damn popular. But there's a reason all of those characters use Superman as the basis to build off of. He's an American icon. He's the definitive superhero. And it's crazy that for as famous and well-known as he is, the majority of people don't seem to even know he has a frickin' dog. And now, the last green flag. And it's something that sounds completely superficial, and a lot of people disagree with it, but they're wrong, and it's actually incredibly important. The characters are recognizably the characters, mostly. In both costume and casting, the characters in this movie actually look recognizably like the characters they're supposed to be playing. Whether they'll act like them or not, we'll see. But superficially, I can recognize this as a DC movie. Mr. Terrific, Metamorpho, Lois Lane, and Lex Luthor look like they stepped straight out of the comics. Guy Gardner, Hawkgirl, Jimmy Olsen, and Crypto are all immediately recognizable as the characters they're playing, despite changes to their designs. Even Superman is much different than he's ever been portrayed on film, but he's clearly and immediately recognizable as Superman. The only character of the main ones I'm really iffy about is Engineer, and all they got to do is cover her with some skin-tight metal at some point, and I will be completely satisfied. Visually, I can tell why each of these actors were casted. They're not just some random person tossed into the role, and they're not just famous actors tossed in to create buzz. Hell, I don't even know who half these actors are. In our last iteration of the DC Universe, if you showed me a picture of Lex Luthor, Lois Lane, and Jimmy Olsen without telling me the context, I would never guess that these were those characters in a Superman movie. And the same goes for the other major DCEU characters like Barry Allen, Aquaman, Steppenwolf, Alfred, Captain Boomerang, and many others. Meanwhile, over in the MCU, for the last couple phases, they've pretty much just given up on casting and taken to tossing well-known actors into the roles to create some buzz. Why was Oscar Isaac Moon Knight? Why was Robb Stark Icarus and Jon Snow Black Knight? Why is Harrison Ford now General Ross without even having a mustache? Why is Pedro Pascal suddenly playing Reed frickin' Richards with a mustache? Just because they're well-known actors who Marvel thinks will get a couple people who weren't going to go see the movie to go see them. There's nothing about them that looks like or specifically channels the characters they're playing. They're all good actors, and they all did good jobs, whether or not the movies they were in was any good. But this kind of just toss a well-known actor kind of casting is so boring for a superhero universe, where you want to see the characters you love come to life on the screen, and this fantastical world will just immediately have the fourth wall broken because you'll keep seeing that actor who is not perfectly casted. Now, as I've said a million times, Gunn drastically changes his characters, so I have no confidence that they're going to act like the characters. But I gotta give props to the effort of making them look like the characters at least. Hell, we've got two characters who were redheads in the comics in this movie, who are somehow still redheads in live action. Do you know how rare that is to even get one? And with the casting we've seen for later projects, it looks like this trend is continuing. Though he's a lot older than he should be, Kyle Chandler is one hell of a good Hal Jordan casting. Much better than just tossing in Ryan Reynolds because he's well known. And I remember when Idris Elba was a very popular Jon Stewart fan casting, when he doesn't really look anything like the character's ever been portrayed. If this was the MCU style, I guarantee he'd be playing Jon Stewart. But this guy here instead, yeah, he actually looks a lot like Jon Stewart to me. Same goes for Supergirl compared to her previous version in the DCEU. And for Lobo, the guy who looks like Lobo even without face paint is casted as frickin' Aquaman? What in the hell? Seriously, what is the point of even adapting these characters if you don't even bother to adapt their designs at the very least? Not every character needs to actually look like the comics to be a good version of them, but some really do. And Superman is one of those characters. And this guy does look like a perfectly suitable version of Superman. She looks like Lois. He looks enough like Jimmy. And I never would have guessed Nicholas Hoult for Lex Luthor, but seeing him balding in the outfit, I see it. A lot of people think this crap doesn't matter, but these movies all start at a superficial level. If the characters don't look recognizable, there's a very good chance they won't act recognizably either. And if none of the characters look or act like the characters, why would anything in the universe be like the source material it's adapting? When Eternals dropped its first ads, it looked nothing like the comics, and wound up being some crappy original story no one cared about except a couple people. Sorry to you two that I keep bashing it. Fant 4-Stick looked nothing like the comics too when it first dropped, and wound up being one of the literal worst movies of all time, who I don't think anyone defends. This superficial stuff matters because it's the bedrock the entire movie is built upon. All decisions after will stem from that initial creative decision about what the character should look like. Either it'll be the thing fans love, or it won't. And if the characters and costumes looking nothing like the source material is a huge red flag, then the opposite has to be a pretty damn big green one, that despite whatever differences there are, the people making the movie cared enough, at least, to try and bring this world to life. But we'll see soon. I recognize that even while saying these green flags, half of me is still looking for evidence of if the movie's going to be crappy. But the only reason I worry so much is because I care so much if it's good or bad. I want Superman to be a cultural icon again. I'm not too worried about all the little details of how he's done, as long as the broad strokes are correct. I really hope this movie is not just good, but freaking great. I love the DC Universe. It means more to me than any other fictional world, and I'll be ecstatic if I get to see a version of it prosper on the big screen. I cannot go in and have another situation where I'm all gung-ho and I watch Superman snap a dude's neck, I watch Batman run over like 3 people, I watch Lex Luthor tweaking out with a mop on his head. So, I'm really rooting for this movie. And if it's good, I'm going to be singing its praises like you've never heard me say before. But if the movie either sucks or is okay, but just a bunch of original character nonsense wearing a DC skin suit, well, I guess I'll just have to drape my face in a cloth and throw on a trench coat, because I guess I'm a grifter. Anyways, click that like, bell, and subscribe to keep up with everything we got coming out this summer. And follow me on X @Fantagonistic for dumbass thoughts, knee-jerk commentary, and pointless internet arguments from time to time. If you got any more green or red flags, let me know below. And let me also know what topic you want to see out of me next. Until then, adios.